Hello and welcome back to our discussion on the boy child and where he falls even as we commemorate the International Day of the Girl Child. Joining us to make sense of this conversation is Barnabas Aliku. He's the director of Rehoboth International Life Ministries. He is a pastor, he's a life coach, a farmer, an entrepreneur, and an intentional husband and father of 4, 2 boys and 2 girls. Now, his organization runs programs such as Boys to Men, boot camps, Man of Honor, and Mothers Raising Sons. He is passionate about the boy child, men, and fatherhood. And I would like to think he's in the right place to help us make sense of this conversation.
Okay, thank you so much for having me on here. I'm so honored and humbled to be here. Well, yes, you can just address me as Sam. I'm popularly known as Sam. Yes, you can address me as Sam.
Our first question to you would be, what sparked your passion for boys or men? How did this all begin?
Yes, I think for me, it's just to answer your question. It's a passion. The passion comes from way back when I was still little, when I was still a boy. And if I can just be vulnerable here, I was impressed that you had to cut off the numbers. I think people had come in. I don't know, somehow I shared with a group of people I'm accountable to that I'll be having a conversation in the morning because I had to do something, but I had to tweak it. So I think that's how the numbers came in, but I'm glad you changed there are so many factors that for me push me to have the passion to reach out to the boy child and men, and also reaching out to mothers raising sons and to the men actually as fathers. But it starts from, if I can be vulnerable to you ladies here, it starts when I was 7 years. I was molested by a house help. And at that time, mommy and daddy had separated. They were not together. So I grew up with bitterness, with anger over my parents because I felt they should have protected me at that time. And so it didn't happen. So this lady told me, if you ever dare say anything, and she had a knife, I was so scared. And mommy was a single mom at that time, very busy, raising 4 boys. And she was really a busy woman. So she was not there for us. And all she came back was, as a civil servant, she had to make ends meet here and there, raising these 4 boys. So all she did was, have you eaten? Have you bathed? Go and sleep. So I didn't have time to share my ordeal or my predicament at that time. So it was very painful. So I grew up disliking mommy and daddy because I felt they should have protected me. But yes, it also comes with the problems that the boys face today, and which are very preventable. But as parents, because of the rat race where we are running after money, we have gaps. And for me, the bigger one as well, which pushes me to the place of reaching out to the boy child, is the fatherhood gap, the mentorship, especially into puberty, initiating the boy from boyhood into manhood. Those are some of the things that really push me. Of course, there's low self-esteem in the boys. Those are some of the things we really address. And then also the internet and smartphone risks, where boys love their gadgets just like any other man, but of course it's misused. The cyberspace is a very tricky place. So the boys, we reach out to them, especially about how to overcome the sexual predators and criminal users who are on the internet or the cyberspace. Then of course there's so many things. Alcohol and drug use, as early as 10 years, boys are drinking, depression and suicide. And then, of course, there is a hyperactivity disorder, which I think is abbreviated ADHD, ADHDs, which affects the boys as well. So that's where my passion comes from. But it's way back when I was 7 years. And yes, it has kept me going and reaching out to the boy child. So for on our database, we've reached out so far for over 250 boys the last 3 years.
Thank you so much, Sam. So we're doing this show in commemoration of the International Day of the Girl Child.
Right.
And many times when we see organizations that are geared towards men, we're like, are you being a part of the conversation? Do you really know what's going on with a girl child? Like, men have always been empowered. Boys have always been empowered. Like, they know what they're up to, or at least we think they know, or at the very least, girls are being put into a certain corner. And
Right.
so when we see organizations like yours, we're asking ourselves, we're saying, but Sam, since time immemorial, it's always been about boys. And now another program on boys, really? The girl child, So how does this pan out? Like, why the boy child when we're still, having challenges with the girl child?
Well, in my opinion, I think the women emancipation has been overblown. The trumpet has been overblown, has been overdone. And for me, it's really out there in society. It could be for maybe the white collar people who are in spaces or maybe making policies, maybe they're not down on the ground to see what's really happening. But when you get down on the ground, you realize that there are some challenges which need to be addressed, especially about the boy child. So why is the boy child is endangered, if I can say. And many people have written articles about this and books saying the boy crisis is with us. It's really happening. And there's a gentleman called John Hoxie, I think is Kenyan. He has also written an issue, about the boy crisis, and with a bit backing up of statistics. And yes, the World Bank has also addressed it and said in recent documentations that the boy child has been adequately addressed, that the boy child is being left behind, or to some extent that there's how can I put it? In extensive analysis by the World Bank, the data indicates that the boy child is at a higher risk of dropping out of school than the girls today. Also, the trend of more boys dropping out of school actually started in the year 2000 onwards, the early 2000s. And this impedes the achievement of the universal primary education, whereby it has been a Millennium Development Goal to see that maybe the girl child is there. But there's an imbalance. The boy child and the girl child being, there was a gap, if we look at back in history, where even it's not very far, it's even as early as 50 years ago, that women, even in countries like Iran, where women were not allowed to drive, not until 2-3 years ago, and other things. But yes, there's been that gap. The emancipation of the girl child has gone in slightly higher than that to the boy child. And this should be balanced for me, because even as I reached out to men today, there is a space of where there is a saying that no one has taught us to live with the emancipated women, whereby some men are so threatened that even if just an income where a wife is earning more income, bringing more on the table than a man, they're all scared or they're worried. But so for me, it's a place of the emancipation going together with being balanced, because right now what happens is more to the girl child than the boy child.
So yes, so we do understand that there's a gap. I guess where we're coming from is that for a very long time, it's always been about the men. The cry for the girls just started a few decades ago. Isn't it too soon to be crying for the boy child? Like, isn't it just a tad too soon? Because it's always been about the men. Always been about the men. The girl child was here for just really recently.
Yes, it's been recent. Yes, Manuela, I understand that. It's been so recent, but the strides that have been taken are huge. And we're saying, yes, the strides are, yes, it's a short time, but the work which has been done is tremendous. And we're saying, look, don't just go alone. let us go together with a boy child and let us address issues together. Because if you don't address the issues together, at the end of the day, we go back to the same circles. Who are abusing the girl child, who are, the divorce rate and all that kind of, because the boy child is being left out. There's some things to be addressed. And maybe I could be discussing some of these issues in your later questions. But yes, these are some of the things that if we don't address them, and yes, the strides that have, it's a short period of time, but the strides have been so great that the boy child is being left out. So we need to have this together, because right now it's like that. And we are saying, let us address this together to have a better community and society.
Then kudos to all the women who've been doing women empowerment. We are doing something right. Over to you, Angie.
Very true. Very good job. Pastor Sam, I do agree with a couple of your submissions, and I should be asking you a question, but I don't see how we can equate centuries upon centuries upon centuries of women's subjugation to a few decades of now they've woken up and remembered that there's a girl child. None of the boy child or children have gotten to the age of being married for what has been done to affect them. So what am I trying to say? Like in Uganda, the girl child campaign isn't even 30 years. So there's no child who has lived through this period that is now mature enough to get to the period where we can start seeing whether there has been a positive or a negative effect to the boy child who is now an adult. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't see how you can compare centuries upon a few decades and then say that, you know what, let's flip back to the boy child because he looks like he's lagging behind. Right in our homes, in the foundations of our homes, these boys are already being empowered. They're heirs. They're the strong. They're this. If they're paying school fees, let's start with the boys.
All the children have their names.
Exactly. 20, 30 years cannot bring that much of a difference. And if it has, then I think the boy child really needs to pull up his socks, because the girl child has been down there for a really long time. And now that they've been given opportunity, they're actually showing up. But in the meantime, the question I would like to ask is, do you believe...
Wait, Angie, pause.
Okay.
Can we respond? So I want to say what I think I'm hearing from Sam and what I think he's saying. I don't think, and you will correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think he's saying that let's first pause on the girls and bring the boys and sort of focus a light on the boys. What I did hear you say is we are empowering the women and we've made great strides here. We are not there yet. But if we don't focus on these issues, those same issues are going to hinder this empowerment movement. That's what I hear him saying. For example, if you keep empowering the women and say, value yourself, we have equal opportunities, blah, 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 but you don't address maybe the father gap with the boys, there's still going to be molestation. There's still going to be sexual harassment. There's still going to be all these vices that caused the women empowerment movement. That's what I hear him saying. He's not saying, let's first pause on the women empowerment. You guys have received so much empowerment. There's been so much conversation. He's saying, let's go together so that as you empower the women, the boys also start to appreciate an empowered woman. He did cite an example where he said, some men don't know how to handle a woman earning more than him. They don't know how to behave around an empowered woman. So we're saying, go on, empower the woman, but also show men that this is a good thing. It's a good thing it's okay for your woman to earn more than you. It's okay for her to be empowered. It's okay for her to have all these titles and have an education where she has chance, an opportunity to earn the same amount of money that you could, or even higher. That is what I hear him saying, not let's first pause and focus on the boys. I think it's a thing of let's go together, not balance the equation, but let's go together. As you empower the women, you empower the boys to appreciate empowered women.
Yeah, I think she hadn't finished her question. she was
Yes,
yet to ask a question. But yes, the elaboration you've given is spot on. I think I can call it a day and go home because she's just said everything I had to say. Rachel has just summarized everything I had to say.
Okay, so my question is, do you believe that the issues of the boy, some of the issues of the boy child, I think you've answered some of this, but do you believe that some of the issues of the boy child have risen because of women empowerment?
I would say yes,
Girl empowerment.
to the greatest extent. And just like there's an author who says, I think is George Wells, he says a boy is a creature of odd feelings. Yes, much as the girl child has the feelings, just like we also have feelings. And yes, it has been talked so much about the girl child, but even as I work with men, I have to tell you that there's some men who are just in those trousers, in those coats, but inside they're still boys because they have not really been, there's been a huge gap left, they're void in there to be called out as men because they are still, they had that gap of, especially a generation after us, a generation before us and even after us, that they have not been called out into responsible masculinity, just like the young girl is called out into womanhood. And by default, a girl child, I'll tell you, I have 2 daughters, but by default, I've been very intentional. If I can just say this here, I'm a very intentional father, to the extent that I cut my children's cords. I enter into my children, all our 4 children have come through C-section. So I always go into the theater and cut their cords. And that's how intentional I've been. And I've been following my girls. Now my daughter turned 14 and 13. When she turned 13, I had to give her a purity ring. I called her girlfriends. They spent at our home for 3 days before I told her, look, you have to hold your virginity until the day you get married. And here is my purity ring. And you give me back this ring on your day of your wedding. And that's how intentional I am. But by default, a girl child is told about some of the things that, look, be careful of the boys. Your menstrual periods are going to start this time. Like my daughter, I was so open to her. I told her, as soon as if you run out of pads, come to me and tell me, Daddy, I'm suspecting my periods are going to start this time. Give me maybe, I'll make sure I buy you the pads that you want or the sanitary that you want. So it's one of the things that by default, but a boy child, somehow things just happen. That even when I at one point my son fell and I told him, boys don't cry, get up. And then it dawned on me later that, look, you're talking to a young man who is really looking up to you as a hero or somebody he looks up to. So yes, the boy child has been left out, to be honest, in many ways for me, and it is a tragedy waiting to happen because the girl child is soaring because of the empowerment. And the boy child is somehow left out in very many ways. So the constant campaign for awareness of the girl child, it's on billboards, it's on newspapers, it's everywhere on radio, but you never hear that about the boy child. So it seems to be working, but at the cost of the boy child.
I can't say that I know a lot about girl or boy child empowerment. And maybe I won't give the right analogy because you can't compare boobs sprouting out with hair or a wet dream to menstrual periods. And I don't want to go there, but I'm just thinking, if you have, for example, a first world country, right? And then you have a third world country. There are things women our grandmothers, our mothers, ourselves, even our own daughters might never have the ability to experience because it's been years. I don't see how we are even able to even consider something like that the reason why men are acting the way they act today, the way that they're in betting houses and everything, is because of girl empowerment. This took place yesterday. And betting and gambling and prostitution and polygamy has been happening for many, many centuries when women were not even allowed to leave the house. And now, because these people who have been locked up in houses for very many centuries have been given this small window and they are running as fast as they can, we are telling them that, you know what, you can't pass the 30-year mark because it looks like you're now catching up with the boys and passing them.
Okay, yes, I hear you. But the truth is, it's a short time, but it's a clear cut. And the clear cut is that it has caused a bit of, it has not caused a little bit, but it has caused an imbalance. I'm telling you, I speak to men, but the truth is many men are challenged by the empowerment. No one is teaching us to live with these empowered women, with these empowered girls, because they have, which is a good thing, but let us do it together. Let us do it together, because the truth is, it affects, because you're not a man, you may not realize how it affects a man's confidence. You may not realize how it affects a young boy's, because by nature, if I can say this to you, by nature, God has created us to be leaders. He has wired us to be on top. It's the reason a man will leave home and go and maybe to look for food, and you tell him there's no salt, there's no this, and he comes back empty-handed, and you tell him, look, you didn't know that when you left home, we didn't have X, Y, and Z. At the end of the day, it's like you're poking his male ego. You are, but if you tell him, look, I know you went out hunting and you didn't come back with anything, but I affirm you that tomorrow I know you'll get something. It's just the fact that we are wired in a man's mind, we are wired to be on top.
But Pastor Sam, let me just hold that up. Pastor Sam, let me just hold that up. There's a Proverbs 31 woman. I honestly believe it's not just men were created to lead. I get that. And I know, Pumla, you're coming. Yes. Men were created to lead. But then there's a Proverbs 31 woman. That's a leader woman. So anyway.
Yes.
Hands up.
And also there's an Ephesians 5. And there's an Ephesians 5 man whereby we are supposed to do to wash the woman with the word and to do all the things and to do great things which God has wired us to do. So by nature, I was just trying to say this, giving the example to show you or to bring to the point. I don't know if it will make sense that men struggle. We struggle. The boy child struggles when we see that it's not really, there's a gap. I mean, the girl child is really on top. Not that it shouldn't be like that, but we're saying let's work together. And I think that's what God designed this to be, that you are helpers, and we are also supposed to love you, to care for the woman. But if we feel the gap, like, it's like that. It's not how God intended it. In reality, it's quite spiritual as well. So the fact is that there is a gap, and the gap is felt. If you really talk to the men out there, I do a program called Man Enough, but every time I'm graduating men, and there are very many girls who reach out to me, because on my database, I have about 450 men. And every time we are graduating, I tell the boys, look, this is a girl. She's an engineer. She has a house. She has a car. This is how much she's earning. And yeah, all she wants is you as a guy. And I was like, no, Pastor Sam, that is too much for me. Can you just maybe get me someone else who is at my level? But at the end of the day, this girl is just saying, look, I want a companion. I don't want anything much with you. But that's the mentality, because we feel threatened. But it starts from as little as when we are young, as a boy child. I always tell people that even when you're in a queue or in a traffic jam, the guys who are taking over on the pavements and doing the shoulders, it didn't start yesterday. It started from right when they were still little, when they were still young. So the boy child as well, if all they're looking at is the empowerment of these movements, drumming and blowing the trumpets for the girl child. We were locked up. It's now an outlet. We have to run and leave the boy child. It doesn't make sense. We need to go together.
So yes, Pastor Sam, I know you are running various initiatives targeted towards boys and those raising them, and
yes,
kudos to you for that. But I'd like to know, in the general scheme of things, what do you hope the impact will be on both the boy and girl child?
Well, I strongly believe, thank you, Pumla, for that. I strongly believe that first and foremost, yes, just to answer your comment you made earlier before, was that yes, these are symptoms that we are seeing today. I totally agree. And the root cause comes from way back into the colonial times. When the colonialists came, they broke, of course, the family core that we had. Our ancestors were quite intentional. They had the initiation process from boyhood into manhood, from girls into womanhood, and all this was broken. We no longer see the Koja talks that were happened. In South Africa, it was worse. The men went out mining and they left their sons and daughters unattended, unmentored. So it goes way back. What we're seeing are symptoms. So even in the Bible, we see what we're doing with our initiatives. We're trying to just to narrow the gap and taking us back to family, because it goes back to family. It's not something that we just say in the marketplace and say this is what's happening. It goes back to family. In Genesis 32, we see a family of a man called Isaac, where we see he had a son called Esau and Jacob. And it's interesting that there were also family politics in this family. There was one son who was a supplanter called Jacob, and we see him turning out, he was like any boy. He was what you'd call a naughty boy. And even he happens to be a man of that character. But then there was one turnaround in his life when he encountered God. And we see this man, even God changed his name from Jacob to Israel. And we see a great nation out of him. So for us, it's back to family, where we're saying if we can get the boy into the right place, we're just saying we're building a block by block. And it's not only to the boy child, but if you get a right man into a right space, it's you've changed a husband, a father, an uncle, an employee, an uncle, a nephew, name it. These are guys that you have changed, you've transformed. So for us, our target is to reach out to this and call out responsible masculinity, that look, there are roles a man should play. Especially like for me, I always tell my wife, we are now running 18 years into marriage, but I always tell her it's just by God's grace. My father never taught me how to treat a woman, how to raise children, but it's through my reading and on exposure that I found myself in walking in purpose. Because for us, it's walking in purpose. So for me, it's to say, to answer your question, Paula, that we are building one block at a time, reaching out to the boy child and calling out responsible masculinity. Because if we get this man, just like Jacob was he became Israel. We see a nation out of Jacob. We see the 12 tribes coming out of this young man. And this is what could happen, that if we get a man into the right place, we see a family man, we see a man who's responsible as an employee or an employer. And this is our target, because we can't see the cycle again going back. Who are in the betting shops, who are raping girls, who are, corrupt, it's the majority are men, who are if you go to prisons, the 95% are men, and comes from a place of family, broken families. So for us, we're mending families, and we're saying if we get a boy into the right place, then we can see as a great place, even for the girl child, because these are men who go out there, and God forbid that you have a girl you have raised so well, and then she bumps into this broken man, and it goes back to the cycle. So we're saying if we can get the man into the right place, just like Jacob was got into the right place, then we can see a better society, a better community, and a better place to live.
In this conversation about girl-child empowerment and raising and supporting girls, what is the role of the boy? And because you are working alongside boys and working with them, how do the boys come in? What's their role in this conversation? Because you've been saying we need to work together, balance, and close the gap. How do the boys complement this conversation?
I think it takes us, thank you, Rachel. It takes us back to almost what I've just mentioned, that we need to get to that place with the boy being into the right place. The boys have a role to play, a big role to play, because we complement each other. And the notion that boys are okay is wrong, because we all have the same feeling. Boys have the same feelings, they have the same struggles, if not maybe even bigger struggles, because these are men who are going to be leaders tomorrow, who are going to be leading their families. And yes, and if they are not at a place of where they can lead their families well, then we have issues. So the recent headlines have asserted that there is a problem with the boys, a boy crisis, a new gender gap between boys and girls. But not that everyone, of course, not everyone agrees this. But the truth is, in this 21st century, where we have had colonization issues undermining the community system in Africa, such as South Africa, as I mentioned, where men went into mining and left their sons, these gaps have to be closed in. And so the boy child has a huge role to play, because they are the future of tomorrow, and they are the leaders of tomorrow. How can they be better husbands? How can they be better employers, and name it, without falling in this trap? So for us is to call out the boy child into responsible masculinity, that they be great men and they be great statesmen. And thank God that there are some women presidents we have today, and I'd love to see that more. But imagine they have a system where they have men working around them. But how can these men be men of value, men of character, men of valor, who can do great things? So the boys have a role to play in all this, but it calls for responsible masculinity. And this responsible masculinity calls for working together, and not, like I said, these are symptoms. And for us is to mend back to family, that if we get the young man into, or the young men into responsible positions as men who are called out to be leaders, to be called to be responsible people, then we have a better society. And so that's why we do what we do, reaching out the boy child. But yes, congratulations to the girl child celebrations. And we really appreciate the milestones that have been created. And it's an amazing, amazing achievement, but only that if we can have the balance, it will be a better space, it will be a better community, it will be a better place for us to live in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor Sam, for your submissions today. It's been quite the show, and I'm sure our audience might find some of the things a bit contentious. But remember, Bump Love is just a conversation starter. Please go and have these conversations in your communities, but also have them in our comments below. We want to hear your thoughts on this gender discussion. Of course, we've touched here and there the whole conversation about empowerment of whether it's the girl child or the boy child is widespread and has so many nuances and areas that we cannot exhaust in one show. But just two things that have stuck with me and that I will go with, aside from the contentious submissions, what we said in the show earlier, which is charity begins at home. You know, that at home we all need to have these conversations with our children. And unfortunately for you didn't have parents to show you, but you have taken it upon yourself to educate yourself, to expose yourself to information. And I must commend you for that.
Thank you.
And so I think you're reaffirming that there's really no excuse, even for boys who have probably not had the opportunity to grow up with parents, that there's information about how you can have responsible masculinity, like you have put it, initiatives like the ones that you are hosting. So let's indeed do right by our children and raise them so that they are responsible when they grow up. And I think the other thing that we were trying to belabor is the working together, and without, because there's that, we need to, how do we put it? I feel like the people who are supporting boys and who are looking out for boys need to really address what the issues are, like Pumla was saying, what the symptoms are, and be honest with themselves. Like Pumla was saying, it's not really about the empowerment movement. These things have been there since time immemorial. But what stuck out for me was the working together, that if we don't work together, then the issues that caused the women empowerment movement are going to come back and bite us. So we'll be making strides, but going back many strides if we are not working together in that regard. So I don't know what your takeaways have been. Do share with us in our comments below and let us know what your thoughts are. Until next time, with love.